Today, we're digging into a brand new executive order that has a huge goal: to stop billions of your tax dollars from just vanishing into a black hole of fraud and waste. We're talking about protecting what the order itself calls America's bank account, and the new plan to finally lock the vault. To really understand why this is such a big deal, we have to start with one number: $521 billion. It's a figure so massive, it's honestly kind of hard to even wrap your head around. And that number? Well, according to the Government Accountability Office, that's the potential cost of fraud to U.S. taxpayers every single year. I mean, that's a staggering drain on public money, and it's the exact problem this new executive order is trying to fix. To help us get a handle on this, the order itself gives us a really simple but powerful way to think about it. It calls the U.S. General Fund America's bank account. And when you frame it like that, you realize we're not just talking about some abstract bureaucracy. We're talking about the core financial hub of the entire nation. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the problem, what we're calling the government's leaky wallet. Then we'll dive into the two-part fix, a new way to fight fraud, and a big plan to centralize all the payments. After that, we'll check out the timeline, and most importantly, what this all means for you. So you gotta ask, right? How does a system that moves trillions of dollars every year end up with such a leaky wallet? Well, the executive order really zeroes in on a couple of fundamental weaknesses in the government's financial plumbing. For starters, it's just the sheer volume of money we're talking about. I mean, look at this. In just one fiscal year, we're seeing almost $34 trillion flowing through the general fund. Just trying to manage a river of cash that massive is an unbelievable challenge. Even a tiny fraction of a percentage in errors or fraud, well, it quickly adds up to billions of dollars lost. But that challenge is made so much worse by a core structural problem. The whole system is completely fragmented. You know, imagine trying to balance your family's budget, but instead of one bank account, you've got dozens, and they all have different rules and different apps. That's pretty much what the government has been doing. And this chart really shows you that fragmentation in action. You'd probably think the Treasury Department handles all the government's payments, right? Well, they only manage about 78%. That other 22%, which comes out to a whopping $1.5 trillion, is handled by a whole network of other separate government offices. They're called non-Treasury disbursing offices, or NTDOs. Basically, you can think of them like branch offices that have their own check-writing authority. The executive order is pretty blunt about what this causes: a confusing mess of disjointed financial reporting that makes it almost impossible to trace where the money is actually going, which, as you can imagine, is a perfect environment for fraud. Okay, so that's the problem. How does the order propose to fix it? Well, the first part of the solution is actually simple in concept. Stop the money from going to the wrong place in the first place. It's a major shift toward prevention. The order calls for a new pre-certification verification process. Now, that sounds like a mouthful, but this is a huge change in philosophy. For years, the government has kind of worked on a pay-and-chase model. Send the money out, and then try to claw it back if you find out something was wrong. This order wants to flip that completely to a prevent-and-pay model. Verify everything first, then send the money. This new process puts a much tighter checklist in the hands of the officials who approve the payments. And as you can see, it's a bunch of common sense questions that, kind of shockingly, weren't always required. Is the money even available for this? Is the person we're paying actually, alive? Does the bank account actually belong to them? Is this for the right contract? It sounds so basic, but systematically forcing these checks before a payment goes out the door is a total game changer. But verification is only half the puzzle. The second part of the solution is this huge structural overhaul. It goes right after that fragmentation problem by pulling the entire system back under one central roof. And this slide lays it out perfectly. The whole idea is to move from the chaotic mess on the left to the clean, organized system on the right. So instead of dozens of different offices using all sorts of different software with very little oversight, the plan is to centralize everything under the Treasury. One system, one set of rules, and that prepayment screening built right in. The goal is simple: total traceability for every single dollar. And the order has specific marching orders to make this happen. First, the Treasury is told to start revoking the authority of those NTDOs. They're basically taking away their checkbooks. Then, huge agencies like the Department of Defense and Homeland Security have to move over to the Treasury's system. And finally, everybody has to get on the same standardized financial software. No more exceptions. Of course, a plan is only as good as its execution, right? A plan is just paper. So the order includes a very specific timeline to force action. This isn't some vague suggestion. We're talking a series of hard deadlines. And this timeline is incredibly aggressive. They are not messing around. Things start moving fast. Within just 30 days, the Treasury has to start pulling the plug on those NTDOs. By the 90-day mark, every single agency has to turn in a compliance plan. And at 180 days, that's just 6 months, the Treasury Secretary has to report progress directly to the president. There's really no room for kicking the can down the road here. It's all about immediate momentum. So let's bring this all home. We've been deep in the weeds with NTDOs and pre-certification, but what does all of this actually mean for you? What is the bottom line for the American taxpayer? Well, the stated goals are exactly what you'd hope to see. The promise of this order is that your tax dollars will be spent more efficiently and transparently. It's about cutting waste, demanding accountability, and maybe most importantly, starting to restore some public trust in how the government manages our money. So the single biggest takeaway here is this whole shift to one centrally managed financial system where every single payment can be verified. The idea is to finally plug the holes in that leaky wallet, so those hundreds of billions of dollars lost to fraud every year can actually be used for what they were supposed to be for. Which leaves us with the final multi-trillion-dollar question. The ambition here is enormous. This is an attempt to completely rewire the financial plumbing of the entire federal government. But with so many agencies, so much bureaucracy, and decades of doing things a certain way, can a top-down order like this truly change the system? Or will it just be another policy that looks good on paper? That's the real test, and only time is going to tell.